92% of European companies just admitted they don't trust U.S. cloud providers with their data anymore. AWS's response? A completely isolated European cloud that even Amazon employees can't access.
Wait, they're literally cutting off their own access? How does that even work, and why would Amazon agree to basically lock themselves out of their own infrastructure?
Because the Cloud Act lets U.S. authorities demand your data from any American company anywhere in the world. If you're storing customer data in AWS right now, this changes everything about your compliance strategy.
Welcome to the Platform Engineering Playbook Daily Podcast, today's news and a deep dive to help you stay ahead in platform engineering.
Today, we're diving into AWS flips switch on EuroCloud as sovereignty fears mount.
But first, let's cover today's top headlines.
There's a fascinating new development in the SRE world that InfoQ just reported on. They're calling it human-centered AI, essentially multi-agent AI systems that work alongside on-call engineers rather than trying to replace them.
Oh, so instead of the typical AI will automate everything narrative, they're focusing on augmentation?
Exactly. The idea is these AI agents handle the tedious, repetitive tasks during incident response while keeping humans firmly in control of decision-making. It's addressing a real pain point, alert fatigue and context switching during incidents.
That actually makes sense. Speaking of things that should work but don't always deliver, Honeycomb just published a pretty provocative piece about DevOps.
Yeah, they're essentially saying that after 20 years, DevOps has failed to deliver on its core promise. The article argues that despite all the tooling and practices, we're still struggling with the same fundamental problems around collaboration and delivery.
20 years and we're still having the throw-it-over-the-wall conversation? That's sobering.
On a more positive note, here's an incredible success story. RunPod, an AI cloud startup, just hit $120 million in annual recurring revenue. And get this, it all started with a Reddit post.
Wait, seriously? A Reddit post?
TechCrunch reports the founders bootstrapped to $1 million in revenue first, then a VC named Radhika Malik discovered them through their Reddit activity and led a $20 million seed round. Talk about the power of community engagement.
That's the dream right there. Build in public, engage with your users, and let the growth speak for itself.
And finally, for those still maintaining legacy applications, jQuery 4.0.0 is officially here. The jQuery blog announced it's been a long development cycle, but they've modernized significantly.
jQuery in 2026? I'm surprised they're still releasing major versions.
Well, there's still a massive install base out there. This release focuses on removing deprecated APIs and legacy browser support, essentially modernizing for applications that can't migrate away yet.
Makes sense. Not everyone can rewrite everything in React.
That covers today's headlines. Now let's get into our main story. So AWS just flipped the switch on their European sovereign cloud, and this is way bigger than just another region launch. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how hyperscalers are thinking about data sovereignty and geopolitical risk.
Right, and the timing here is fascinating. They've been building this out since June of last year, that's right around when everyone started getting nervous about potential changes in U.S. policy.
Exactly. And here's what's really interesting. They're not just slapping a sovereign label on existing infrastructure. This is physically and logically separate from all other AWS regions. They've created an entirely new organizational structure with EU subsidiaries managed by EU citizens who are, and I'm quoting here, obligated to abide by European law.
Okay, but how different is this really from what they've been doing? I mean, AWS has had EU regions for years.
That's where it gets interesting. The 2018 Cloud Act fundamentally changed the game. Before that, you could argue that data stored in Frankfurt was safe from U.S. government access. But the Cloud Act says if you're a U.S. company, you have to hand over data regardless of where it's stored. That's a direct conflict with GDPR.
And that's what the Schrems II ruling was in 2020, right? That basically said the Privacy Shield agreement wasn't enough protection.
Precisely. Max Schrems, the Austrian privacy activist, essentially proved that U.S. surveillance laws are incompatible with EU privacy rights. And that put every U.S. cloud provider in an impossible position: comply with U.S. law and violate EU law, or vice versa.
So how does this new sovereign cloud actually solve that problem? AWS is still an American company at the end of the day.
That's the multi-billion-dollar question. They're trying to create what I call a legal airlock. These EU subsidiaries that operate the sovereign cloud are supposed to be independent enough that they can refuse U.S. government data requests. But here's the thing. We don't know if that'll hold up in court until it's tested.
And the stakes here are massive. Gartner is saying European IT spending will hit $1.4 trillion next year, and 61% of European CIOs want to increase their use of local cloud providers.
Right, and 53% say geopolitics will restrict their use of global providers in the future. That's not just a preference, that's existential risk for AWS's European business. We're talking about potentially losing access to one of the world's largest cloud markets.
What about the technical implementation? How do you actually create a sovereign cloud that's truly separate?
Well, they're starting with 90 services: compute, database, networking, security, storage, and AI. But here's the kicker. Only authorized AWS staff running the European sovereign cloud have access to what they call a replica of the source code needed to maintain services. That's a fascinating architectural decision.
Wait, a replica? So there's still a master copy somewhere else?
And that's what it sounds like, and that raises questions about updates, security patches, feature parity. I mean, how do you maintain a sovereign fork of your entire cloud platform?
And what about the operational overhead? Running a completely separate cloud infrastructure can't be cheap.
No, it's not. But look at what's at stake. Microsoft and Google are doing the same thing. Oracle announced their EU sovereign cloud last year. This isn't optional anymore. It's table stakes for doing business in Europe. Coming up, we'll dig into exactly how AWS is trying to thread this needle technically and legally, and what it means for platform engineers who need to make decisions about where to run their workloads. So let's break down what AWS is actually building here. They've created this parent company structure with 3 local subsidiaries incorporated in Germany. That's not random. Germany has some of the strictest data protection laws in the EU.
And they've got this advisory board with 3 Amazon staff and 2 independent board members. That seems like they're trying to create some distance between AWS proper and this sovereign entity.
Right, but here's where it gets technically interesting. They're extending from the AWS region in Germany across the EU, and they're adding local zones in Belgium, Netherlands, and Portugal. Now, local zones are typically about latency, but in this case, they're using them for data residency.
Oh, that's clever. So instead of building entirely new regions, they're leveraging local zones as a lighter-weight way to distribute sovereign infrastructure.
Exactly. And for customers with even stricter requirements, they're offering dedicated local zones, AI factories, and outposts that can run on-prem. It's like a sovereignty gradient. You can choose your level of isolation based on your regulatory needs.
But let's talk about the elephant in the room, the metadata. AWS says customers will keep all metadata, including IAM, billing, and usage metering systems, only in the EU. That's huge.
It is, and it's also incredibly complex. Think about what that means architecturally. IAM is the backbone of AWS security. Having a completely separate IAM system means you can't use the same identities across sovereign and non-sovereign regions.
So if I'm a multinational company with workloads in both the US and this EU sovereign cloud, I need to manage 2 completely separate sets of credentials and permissions?
That's exactly right. And it's not just IAM. Billing is separate, usage metering is separate. It's essentially 2 different AWS accounts that happen to share the same APIs.
What about the actual data flow? How do they ensure data doesn't leak between regions?
They're calling it physically and logically separate. In practice, that likely means dedicated network infrastructure, separate control planes, and probably even separate hardware. Remember, they need to be able to prove to regulators that there's no way for data to accidentally flow to non-sovereign infrastructure.
That sounds expensive. And what about updates? If there's a critical security patch, how do they deploy it to both environments without creating a potential data leak?
That's where that replica of the source code comment becomes crucial. My read is they're maintaining separate code bases that are kept in sync through some kind of controlled process. But that introduces versioning challenges, testing overhead.
And let's not forget about the human element. They need EU citizens to run this, which means hiring and training a completely separate ops team. That's a massive undertaking.
Here's a number that'll blow your mind. Forrester says 70% of the European cloud market is in the hands of U.S. providers. That's hundreds of billions of euros at risk if they can't figure out sovereignty.
How does this compare to what Microsoft and Google are doing?
Microsoft's approach is interesting. They've promised to fight the U.S. government in court if needed. They're betting on legal protection rather than technical isolation. Google's enhanced sovereignty features are more similar to AWS, but they haven't gone as far with the separate subsidiary structure.
But here's what I don't understand. If push comes to shove and the U.S. government really wants that data, can these subsidiaries actually say no?
That's the trillion-dollar question. The legal theory is that these EU subsidiaries aren't subject to U.S. jurisdiction, but we won't know if that holds up until someone tests it in court. And that test case could literally determine the future of cloud computing in Europe.
How do these new sovereign clouds manage performance implications? Running a completely separate infrastructure has to impact latency, throughput, maybe even feature availability.
AWS is being cagey about that. They're launching with 90 services, which is substantial, but not everything. I'd expect some services, especially newer ones or those with heavy U.S. dependencies, might never make it to the sovereign cloud.
And that creates a tough choice for platform engineers. Do you optimize for sovereignty and potentially give up some services, or do you risk regulatory issues to get full AWS functionality?
Stick around. In our final segment, we'll give you the exact framework for making these decisions and what platform teams need to consider when evaluating sovereign cloud options. All right, so if you're a platform engineer trying to navigate the sovereignty maze, here's your decision framework. First question, what's your data classification? Not all data needs sovereignty.
Right. You need to map out what's actually sensitive. Customer PII, financial records, health data, that needs sovereignty. Your application logs or performance metrics, maybe not.
Second question, what's your regulatory exposure? Are you in a regulated industry? Do you have government contracts? Are you handling data for EU citizens? The answers determine your sovereignty requirements.
And here's something people miss. It's not just about current regulations. You need to think about where regulations are heading. The EU Data Act is coming, and it's going to add even more requirements.
Third consideration, architectural complexity. If you go sovereign, you're essentially running two separate cloud environments. That means double the operational overhead, separate CI/CD pipelines, different monitoring stacks.
Plus, the cost implications. Sovereign clouds are going to be more expensive, smaller scale, dedicated infrastructure, separate teams. AWS hasn't published pricing yet, but I'd expect at least a 20–30% premium.
Here's my practical advice. Start with a hybrid approach. Keep your sensitive workloads in the sovereign cloud and everything else in regular regions. Use data classification to drive placement decisions.
And invest in abstraction layers. If you're going to be managing multiple cloud environments, you need tooling that can work across both. Think Kubernetes for compute abstraction, maybe something like Crossplane for infrastructure management.
But here's the real insight. This isn't just about compliance, it's about competitive advantage. European customers are increasingly preferring vendors who take sovereignty seriously. Being early on sovereign cloud could be a differentiator.
What should teams be doing right now to prepare?
3 things. 1, audit your current AWS usage and identify which workloads might need to move. 2, start planning for split architectures, especially around identity and access management. 3, budget for the additional costs and complexity.
And keep an eye on the legal landscape. The first time one of these sovereign clouds gets tested in court, it could change everything. If AWS's legal airlock doesn't hold, we might see even more dramatic changes.
Looking ahead, I think we're going to see more regionalization of cloud services. The days of one global cloud are probably over. We're heading toward a world of interconnected but legally separate cloud regions.
Which is kind of ironic, right? The internet was supposed to break down borders, and here we are building new ones.
True, but maybe that's not entirely bad. Data sovereignty is ultimately about giving people control over their information. As platform engineers, we're the ones who need to make that technically possible.
So, final takeaway. If you're running workloads in Europe, you need a sovereignty strategy. Whether that's AWS's new sovereign cloud, a European provider, or a hybrid approach, you can't ignore this anymore.
And remember, this is just the beginning. As geopolitical tensions evolve, as regulations change, as technology advances, the definition of sovereignty will keep shifting. Stay flexible, stay informed, and most importantly, stay focused on what's best for your users and their data.
Because at the end of the day, that's what platform engineering is about, building systems that serve people while respecting their rights and their choices.
Exactly. The sovereign cloud isn't just a technical challenge or a regulatory hurdle. It's a fundamental rethinking of how we build and operate global systems in a world that's increasingly concerned about digital sovereignty. And that's a challenge worth tackling. That's our show for today.
If you found this valuable, please subscribe and share with a friend who'd appreciate it.
Drop us a comment with your thoughts on today's topic.
Links to everything we discussed are in the show notes.
Until next time.